Hi there. This time we're going to look at feminism again, of course, but we're going to look particularly at tourism and the role of women in tourism and the role of tourism in international politics. Again, we're looking at Cynthia Enlow's book. Let me just share my screen. Oops. So I guess it's titled Masculinity and Femininity in Tourism. And so, gender or travel has different implications depending on the gender for Cynthia Enlow. Masculinity, it's masculine to travel away from home, to go far away and to explore and to bring back the fruits of your exploration, I suppose, and perhaps of your conquest as well. So travel away from home, it's a masculine idea. Femininity is like, look, if you travel unaccompanied or without permission from home, then you can do that, but you have to surrender something, and it's your respectability. It's not that women are not allowed to travel away from home. There's no laws preventing it, but the social mores, and of course that's changing to some degree right now. But of course, traditionally in the past, right, there was much more of a rigid rule. And so part of what Cynthia Enlow does, right, and you'll see this in the rest of the lecture, is that she's sort of exploring the change away from that to some degree, right? How respectability was brought about, right? And so you can think of that part of the lecture as that part of the book, right? I'm really just sort of lecturing based on the book, but what you can see is it as, if you want, is a challenge, right, to those expectations that were internalized by women, and those challenges, that's power, right? That's international politics. And so again, part of the lecture is to sort of show this. But remember, like, well, why am I showing you that, right? And the answer is, right, because that's international politics for Cynthia Enlow and for feminists, right? And so that's partly why I'm doing it. All right. So she starts off with these Victorian lady travelers. Here's another thing that you're going to see here as well, certainly in this slide, right? Is that so while we're sort of tracking this movement of women, sort of this shifting of the boundaries of the social expectations for women and travel, which is that's only part of what we're going to do, but it's a big part. The other thing that we're going to see, right, is that it's not that women are saints. Feminism is not a celebration of women. Sort of an uncritical celebration of women and like how great is the world now that women are in it and they have more freedom and more agency. That's again too simplistic, right? There's play between the power structures and women, and like as they stand up, the power structure sort of uses them as well, right? In other ways, which is why. When you get that conception of power, I mentioned last time, and I should mention it again, right? Because I think Cynthia Enlow, and I think feminism probably more broadly, right, would look at power if it's sophisticated. I don't know, maybe that's my own qualification, I suppose. But like it's looking at power from perhaps a Foucauldian point of view. Interesting, I didn't mention this last time, but I mentioned Discipline and Punish, which gives a good account of. There's lots of things that would, but that's one of Foucault's books that will give you a good account of what power looks like. But for him, but the other book, if you want to see a critique of that, right, you could read Stephen Luke's book called Power, and that goes in sort of a history of how we've investigated power and how we've thought about power over time. Starting with very simple ideas about how power is exercised and sort of ending up, well, I was going to say ending up with Foucault. It doesn't end up with Foucault. He deals with Foucault. And then he goes on and critiques Foucault. But I don't know. My impression from reading that book is that Stephen Luke doesn't end up too far away from Foucault, as far as I could tell. But but even though he criticizes them quite robustly, I'll say. Anyway, so that's another option if you're interested in this conception of power that we've talked about last time, and it's probably going to come back up again in this lecture. Those are two books that you could read for that. Anyway, so let's get to the Victorian lady travelers. This is the beginning, right? So the middle class women. I should have a quick note that, like, the middle class probably in America doesn't really mean the same as it means in Britain, right? And probably Cynthia Enlow's using it in the more the British sense here. But middle class women, it's not sometimes we say middle class here, we mean like working class, I think, in the United States, like people with jobs who are sort of trying to buy houses and maintain some sort of standard of living, go on a vacation or something like that. But that's not what middle class means here. Right? Middle class here, it's probably women who perhaps don't need to work, actually. They have a certain level of respectability in life. If you've ever watched the British comedy show Keeping Up Appearances, Hyacinth Bouquet, she wants to be middle class. That's what she's trying to achieve. And of course, she's got her sister's her sister Daisy is who she's trying not to be, right? That's Sister Daisy, and she lives with I'm forgetting the name of the sister, Daisy, and they're all flowers, of course. Rose, Daisy and Rose. They live together on the council estate, I think, with Onslow, right? Onslow's Daisy's husband, and that's where she's perhaps from, right? And that her father actually lives over there with Daisy and Rose, and that's where she's from, and she's trying not to be from there, right? She's trying to be, and so she, she's the reason why it's funny, right? Is she really is, working class, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that. And but she wants to be, nothing wrong with that for you and me, but she wants to be something else. She wants to be middle class. So it's a sort of aspirational. And so she adopts some of these sort of behaviors and these sort of ideas about respectability. Maybe she even wants to be a little bit higher than middle class. Her husband's probably middle class and content with that, but she wants to be an aristocrat, which is why it's quite funny. Anyway, that's a recommendation, by the way, if you're looking for one for comedy. It probably looks quite dated these days, but it's from the 90s. But anyway, middle class. So that was a longer explanation than I wanted for that, really. But we're talking about sort of, I suppose, respectable women with a certain reputation, right? Who are trying to maintain that sort of status in society. So middle class, but they risked losing that status, right? So they risked being disgraced by going off the beaten track without, and Cynthia Enlow makes them white male escorts. And so, well, that's difficult because actually that was maybe a woman's major asset, particularly if we're talking about Victorian era. One of her major assets was her respectability, right? Her status in society, and so you didn't want to jeopardize that, and so that made it difficult to travel. But then you had this class of Victorian lady travelers who challenged this ban by going to more remote areas, and plays into narratives of feminism. But again, this idea of, like, we're not just celebrating women here. We're not just saying, like, yay, women got more rights and they pushed back the borders. That's not what Enlow wants us to do. She wants us to look at them and say, look, they, in doing this, right, they ended up sort of supporting and bolstering imperialism. Victorian times British women, probably. And the reason why that they did that, or the reason why Enlow thinks that they did that, why she argues that they did that, is that they go off into far-flung parts of the British Empire, or on the edge of the empire, right? Which, again, on one hand, women are not supposed to go there, and so they were sort of pushing the frontiers out of what women could do. On the other hand, is like they're coming, the way they fund that, right, is that they're going out and then they're coming back and they're giving talks in society, right, after dinner talks to other ladies about these exotic places, right, exotic places and peoples. And so, you can go quite deep into this, right? But on the sort of more shallow end of things, it's like, okay, these women are going off and then they're coming back and they're sort of talking about these far-flung parts of the empire, and sort of implicating the women that they're talking to and themselves, of course, right? And the women who have come to hear them speak because they have either some interest in travel, or they have admiration for these women who are traveling, and they're coming to listen to them, and they're themselves are sort of being linked in, educated in, and sort of implicated in the empire. I become familiar and attached in some way to the empire, and if you go a little bit further down into, these women have a particular perspective, right? They're middle class, white British women, right, with some status, and they're going off here to these other places. And so when they come back and they're telling the stories, right, they're sort of playing into some of these narratives of exoticism, sort of fetish. What can I say the word? I don't say it very often. Fetishizing the exotic, the foreign, and perhaps in a way as well, like glorifying the taming of the wild, right, of the outside of European civilization. So that's, I think, Enlow's argument on that. It might be connected as well to what we're talking about with in that first lecture with Antichna, where we're talking about sort of the feminizing the other, right? The sort of stories that they tell might maybe, feminize the outside of maybe European civilization, or British civilization in particular. And watch this develop as well. Watch this argument develop in the next slide. The next slide is about World's Fairs, right? So you probably know what a World's Fair is. You've probably heard of them. And there were these events, and there were very large exhibitions, and they might take place in Chicago, right, London, big major metropolises. And the idea was that you could go there instead of traveling, right, to a faraway place. You could go just into the, to the exhibition center, wherever that is in the city, and you can sort of travel the world that way, right? You can go around and you'll find there, booths from different countries, right? You can meet people from all over the world, and they're showing you there about life in their country, right? That sort of thing. And so there's these exhibits, and what Enlow's saying is that they're expressing this elaborate political cosmology. Don't be put off by the cosmology thing, right? I mean, a world, a political picture of the world, right? A political sort of study of the world, the cosmology. And they're sort of showing this idea of progress, imperial trusteeship, primitive people, and advanced people, right? And so I think we get onto this later on, but with the last point, but the idea of putting everybody in the world together, right, and sort of showcasing the most recent inventions, perhaps, right, of the more advanced countries, right, but then the exhibitions of the more of some countries, right, that's not about invention, that's not about modernity, right, that's about sort of tradition, right, or the quaint practices or the handicrafts or something like that, right, that they do there, and it's sort of these World's Fairs, say Cynthia Enlow, they divide the world into sort of advanced and primitive people, and then instead of imperial trusteeship, right, that the imperial countries of the world, European countries, right, and I suppose America. So at that point, right, a sort of the rightful tutors, if you like, right, of the world. They're the ones who are going to show the correct way to develop and the right way to the future. Anyway, this was the political cosmology expressed in the World's Fairs. It's got white men's manliness fueled the civilizing imperial mission. Yeah, I mean, you can sort of look at this sort of curation, right? This curation of the world, and it's taking place in Western cities, and we're sort of bringing some from, a couple of people from each part of the world, and exhibiting them in some way. Well, and again, within some overarching narrative, right? That look how we're helping the world to progress. And look what we have, all these things that we have. These folks over here, they don't have that, but we're showing them it here in this World's Fair. We're going to help them to advance and become more like us, right? So that's the civilizing imperial mission. Here's the other thing. It also, like, and this is, I think, where we get back to, and there's an element of it already, right, in the white men's manliness fueling the civilizing imperial mission, but here we are now, really, with feminism, in this idea of the civilized women's domestication was proof of manly mission's worthiness. And so she talks about, well, it's the last one, right? But there was a women's building designed there, and women were in charge of this. It was managed by women, and it showcased recent advancements in domestic technology, with the idea of being like, look what science has brought us. Right? And that's the sort of it's made it so that we can have a easier life at home. Sort of like, do you want to be a woman here in America, or do you want to be a woman over there in I guess I'm thinking New Guinea or something like that, right? Do you want to be a woman in Western Europe, or do you want to be a woman over there in sub-Saharan Africa or something like that, right? And look at the inventions that we enjoy here. Look at the domestic technology that makes our life easier. We don't have to struggle, right? And so that sort of protection of women, or like the protection of women from the daily grind, from the hard labor, right, that's suffered elsewhere in the world, and the prospect that we can bring this to them as well. Cynthia Enlow sees that as sort of this sort of showcase of again, it's a white men's civilizing imperial mission, and the part of that mission is women's domestication and ease of life. And then we move on to package tours. So again, we're sort of moving through time here, and women's role in travel and tourism is changing, right? From here, we're pushing the boundaries of where civilized women, right? But particularly middle class, white women are allowed to go, and that then we're like, well, women's domesticity is a sort of an example in the world. Women's domesticity, right there, again, maybe their inability to travel, right, or their place in the home, right, is an example of the success of the imperial mission. And so now here we are, like a little bit further on with these package tours. Thomas Cook, which was for a long time when I was young, and 100 years before I was young as well. They sold these package tours, and you could find a Thomas Cook shop, office, I suppose, in every town in Britain, in the high street. I think they've gone away now, right, with the internet, but anyway. Tourism is a set of presumptions about womanhood, manhood, education, and pleasure. Fantasized women of masculinized tourism, exotic, not like the women back home. So package tours then becomes part of the selling of those. Maybe I'll talk more about package tours. I don't know if that's something that's a familiar term in the United States is the thing. I don't know if it's a time thing or if it's a geography thing, but I guess either way, many of you might not be. This might not be something that you're familiar with, but I don't know that for sure. Anyway, the idea of the package tour is it goes to a particular place for a particular amount of time, and you pay one price, right? And everything, the itinerary is all built in. And actually what will happen, I think with Thomas Cook in particular, for example, and other large tour operators, I think even to this day to some degree, although again, I'm not sure how big Thomas Cook is these days, but you'll pay the price for the holiday. Let's say you buy a holiday for £300, and that holiday is going to, let's say, Ibiza, right? And so when you pay that, what you're getting is you're getting a flight there and back, and you're getting a hotel in a resort for a number of days, and you might also be getting the food and everything included in that as well, right? That might be all inclusive. But that flight, it's chartered by the tour company, right, by Thomas Cook, let's say. And so it's a simple way to go on holiday. You don't have to make the arrangements yourself. And the thing that was advantageous to women when Thomas Cook first started back, I believe, in the 19th century, maybe towards the end of the 19th century, you have to check that out. But one of the advantages was, I think at first they were taking people to like the seaside in England. So there's special trains that they put on, and this. But the thing that was particularly useful to women is that there was always like chaperones there. There was, the tour operator would employ people to go with the group. Right? So there's a big group of you. You're all going to the same place, to the same hotel for the same amount of time on the same train or the same plane later on when you're going to Ibiza. And and you've got representatives from the company there making sure that you make sure you're on time for your train, making sure your hotels to your satisfaction, making sure you're behaving yourself, you're not causing a big ruckus, you're not interfering with other people's enjoyment. And so those people that were employed by Thomas Cook, maybe it was Thomas Cook himself at the beginning who was doing this job, but they made it so that it was respectable for women, right? They could travel far from home with a respectable chaperone, right? And of course, Thomas Cook, like I've already said, got very big. Long after chaperoning was it still remained in a similar format, right? They could pay a set amount and be able to travel. But so I've talked there about the bottom two mostly. The top two, right, is Thomas Cook. Like, he wasn't originally selling holidays to women in particular, right? So there was much more of a market for men, right? Because it was perfectly acceptable for men to travel away. But the thing that the early tourism sort of is that it assumes men are going to want to travel, and part of the attraction it I think thinks is that the women over there are different from the women here, right? So the as working class men got more and more leisure time and were able to travel, things that might have attracted them to travel might have included, what it meant to be a man, but also what women were like in other parts of the world. You might want to go and find out about that, and perhaps be looked after over by exotic women in exotic locations. So there's two sides there, right? We'll sum it up like this. There's two sides to these package tours. One is the fantasized women of masculinized tourism, right? And the other is the respectability in that women could now enjoy as they traveled, right? So again, it's not straightforward. It's not just one thing or the other. It's both, right? In some ways, it's promoting it's promoting two separate but perhaps related ideas of femininity, like the exotic woman who's going to look after you when you go abroad, and then also the respectable woman who has to be chaperoned in order to keep her respectability. And the sort of two ideas of femininity there that are both in play in these package tours. And so we're coming forward, I guess, into today, right now. But more countries have come to rely on tourism as a sort of source of economic growth, and so countries must make themselves accommodating to women from abroad. It's now perfectly respectable, I can assure you, for women to travel abroad, even unchaperoned. And as a result of that, now at least half of the travelers are women, right? And so that's half of your market, at least half. Interestingly, I've ran a study abroad here at ASU for a few years, and if anybody's interested in going to Macedonia for summer, Macedonia and Greece for summer abroad, there we do sort of identity and state identity and the built urban environment there. We visit 2 countries currently. And if you were, one of the things that I learned as I developed that with Professor Sivak, if any of you know him, as we've developed and as we've marketed that, one of the things that we've learned actually is that there's a scholarship available at ASU for people who would like to go on there. There's more than one, but there is one that's aimed at increasing diversity on these study abroad classes, and interestingly, like if you're a man, which I know some of you will be, if you are a man, actually you're eligible to apply for this, because the interesting thing is that in terms of study abroad at ASU, women outnumber men quite considerably on these study abroad classes, and so that's why I'm saying at least half of the market for travel is women. It's perhaps more. So they have to make themselves accommodating to women from abroad. Egypt, as a counterexample, was economically damaged when the Arab Spring scared away American and European tourists. India and Egypt have, I guess, high levels of sexual harassment in public places, and this only starts to matter when it affects tourism. It says here at the bottom, when women tourists to India dropped 35%. That's after, you might remember this has been a few years ago now, but I don't remember exactly how many. Although it happens periodically, so it must be before 2014, because that's the edition of Enlow's book I was reading was published in 2014. But there's quite a high profile case of women being quite seriously sexually assaulted on public transport in India. And there was one woman in this case in particular that became very, caught the attention of world media. And as a result of that, 35%, there was a 35% drop in women visiting India. And the Indian government had to do something about it, right, because of that. And so, again, right, tourism is a part of your development policy, right, in that you are, well, that implies 2 things, right? One, that you're spending your money to try and attract tourists, right, to build resorts and good links from the airport and that sort of thing in your country, right? And then you try to make yourself desirable, and then the money that you get from that, you then use to further develop the island. I'm saying the island. I guess I got the West Indies in mind to some degree here, right? Where a big part of the economy is geared towards attracting tourists, and so it's a big mistake if you have things that are putting, particularly women, off traveling there. In connection with that, right, we've got beauty pageants and tourism. Enlow talks about how the governments of Iceland, Venezuela, and Sudan have all tried to win either Miss World or Miss Universe in order to improve tourism in their country. Right? That's been part of their tourism development policies. Right, and so what's going on there? Right, something about being able to. It's about women and perhaps women's beauty or attractiveness as like a source of power for states, right? And so why, when you're doing a class on international politics, maybe you don't expect to be hearing about beauty pageants, right? But Cynthia Enlow says no, we should be looking at beauty pageants, right, as they relate to tourism in particular. What sort of image are we sending the world about our women? Well, that they're beautiful, and if we can do that, then that can help us become more powerful economically, and then ultimately perhaps militarily as well, right? There's a connection between all these, and that's a lot of what feminism in international politics is trying to make these connections. Talks about stewardesses as well. She talks in the book there about sort of the history of stewardesses and the sort of gradual move away from, there was a time, for example, on ships where all of the crew of ships were male. I guess I just got a picture of like pirates or something like that, but that's not exactly, we don't have to go back that far. Cruise liners, like, generally speaking, right, those were male crew members. She talks about actually as well, she talks a bit about race in there as well, and class, talking about sort of the command structure. Those who were sort of role, running the ship, steering the ship, navigating the ship, those sorts of things. The officers, I suppose, I think is how she refers to them. The officers tended, I think, to be white males, whereas perhaps the stewards, we call them stewards on the ship as well as in the air. It might have been from different races, but there wouldn't have been women. But over time, United Airlines in particular figured this out. One of the earlier ones to figure it out, but actually it was discovered that actually people preferred to be, I'm going to say looked after again, but I suppose served. When we think of stewards, we should be thinking of serving food and drinks, either on ships or on aircraft. But it was found out, it was discovered that people would be more likely to travel with your ship if you were using women in those roles rather than if you were using men. People preferred to be served by women in those circumstances, and so that's why United Airlines introduces stewardesses. But again, it's this link between the feminine, travel, tourism, and international politics. And then chambermaids, 90% of which are women. We're just talking about chambermaids, but again, women who are working in the tourist industry, working in this case hotels. Those who are cleaning your rooms. Have you ever had the experience? I don't think I have. I'm trying to think, but I've stayed in some hotels over time, and I don't know if I've ever, I've bumped into the member of staff that's cleaning my room, or out in the hallway, right, cleaning other people's rooms. I've of course, probably have had the experience yourself, as you're leaving for the day or coming back, they're there working, and I don't know if I've ever encountered a man. And I think I asked the class this, and I don't know if I got this directly from Cynthia Enlow maybe, but how would you have a different experience? Like, would it feel different, right? If it wasn't a woman, but it was a man, would it change your change the image of the hotel? Would it, would it affect your likelihood to stay there again? Whatever you answer to that, though, it is 90% women that are employed in this role, according to Enlow, and Enlow thinks that there's a particular reason behind that, right? And that it's this women's work idea, right? And it's assumed that this is, it's assumed, right, that women will do this anyway, right? This is part of this sort of the workings of power, right? Women will do this anyway, is the expectation. Women will clean. Women will, look after you. They'll serve you drinks. They'll serve you food. They'll want to take care of you. That's what women will. That comes naturally to them. And because of that, you don't need to train them. You don't need to train women to do this because they already just know how to do it. That's what they would be doing if they didn't have a job. If they were at home, they would be cleaning rooms and making food and serving it to their family members. And so this just comes naturally to them. They have this natural proficiency. They don't need any training, right? And so because they don't need training, it's like it's an unskilled job, right? It's not, now, this is not what I'm saying, right? Of course, this is what, not even what Cynthia Enlow is saying. This is what Cynthia Enlow is saying is the sort of the expectation. This is the narrative, I suppose, the shared knowledge, right, that exists and sort of structures this part of international politics. But because of the natural proficiency, there's low wages, right? Because if you don't have to be trained, then if anybody can do it, and if women are just born with that ability to be able to, clean hotel rooms or to serve food at the bar, then why there's an infinite supply of women, right? In terms of jobs, we don't need any special training or experience or anything. So that's the idea there. This is, again, it's the link to international politics through tourism, through attracting people to stay at your hotel, to come to your country where the women will feel safe. Women are also, part of that perhaps is that, like, women are cleaning the rooms, right? And women are serving the drinks and that sort of thing. And then, of course, there's the sex tourism, where talk about 400,000 more women than men in Bangkok because of tourism, right? People go there to Bangkok, many people, for purposes of sex tourism, and so that has increased the number of women there, right? Women have been, women have been attracted, which seems in some ways difficult for me to say, but again, Cynthia and Rose, they're using their agency, they're strategizing, right? And that strategy is leading them to come into Bangkok. It's big business, but in doing that, they're commodifying themselves. That's too simplistic as well, but they are being commodified by the industry, but of course they are also, entering that industry, right? So there's some level of agency here. But it also, what Enlo wants to talk about here is how it shapes the economic, political, and cultural relationships between countries, and it's in the following way, right? It's like, well, okay, well, where are the customers coming from? Right? Where are you traveling from? The USA, Western Europe, Russia, China, perhaps. You're coming from those countries, perhaps, to Bangkok, and where do those women come from, right? And perhaps the answer is like the rural, the countryside, right, in Thailand, right? And so then, if that's a correct characterization of the sort of nationality of the customers and the nationalities of those who are supplying the labor in sex tourism, then does that change the way we see those countries? Does it interfere with the way that those, what sort of laws might arise? I mean, the obvious one is that, look, the sex tourism is facilitated, right, by Thai laws, right, that allow women to be employed and to supply this sort of labor in their country. And so, where that's not allowed in the places where people are coming from, oftentimes, right? And so, and then think of, what about the visa regime? Who do they allow to come and who do they keep out? Right? So, who would want to come and who doesn't want to come? So anyway, that's again these. So I've talked a little bit about economic and cultural relationships. Political is a little bit harder for me, I think, right? I mean, does it affect the politics, right? Does it affect negotiations between countries? Does it affect the standing of different countries? I don't know. And then there's questions, right, about which I already sort of introduced, I guess, and I already sort of hinted at earlier on this slide, right? But do women supply this labor voluntarily or not? And for Enlo, it's more complicated than yes, they do or no, they don't. It's like, well, they have some limited agency. Like at some point they could, I don't think Enlo says this exactly, I'm taking this from another book, right? But they could work on the farm, right? They could do sort of backbreaking labor over there for much less money. But they choose to come here and do this, right? So, what are the options that they have? That's the limiting agency, but then they still, given that limited agency, they're still making some choices, right? So there's an element of voluntarism to it, although there's also an element of limited agency. And then, of course, who profits from this, right? And that's it for now. So quickly wrap it up then, since that is the end. That what we've done is we've looked at tourism as sort of an element of international politics, travel and tourism. And part of what we've done is looked at the history of women in travel. We've looked at some different roles that women tend to play in that, how that affects state power, how that affects the relationships between states. And this is overall, I guess, sort of meta game here is to show you like what is feminism, like, and what sort of things are they looking at. And there it is.